The time at the tone is 5:15, Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. I'm going to call the Economic Development Committee meeting to order. There is a quorum of members present. So our first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from March 7th, 2024 meeting. Is there approval or are there changes or corrections to be made?
Move to approve.
Okay, is there a second? Alder Killian. So I didn't hear any corrections or additions, so all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, minutes have been approved. Now we're moving on to number 2, presentation from the TIF task force. So Lisa.
Okay, thank you. You may know that for about the last 6 months, I've been appointed to and participating on the Marathon County TID task force. The county decided to form a task force to better understand TIDs and their economic impacts on their operations and budgets as a tax-generating entity. So what they asked us to do was to spend our time between the time we formed and April of 2024 studying the impact of TIDs in terms of budgets, revenue, service needs, and levy loss or gain during the lifespan of a TID. And the TID is also, TID task force was also asked to make policy recommendations following its work relative to its findings. The task force was comprised of 7 county board members and me. With the county board members that were appointed were a mix of urban and rural representation, and they invited the city to send a representative because in terms of land mass and size, we are the largest user of TID in the county, even though other municipalities have them. So the study portion, we studied TID law, we studied the Department of Revenue guidelines on the management and formation of TIDs. And we determined very quickly, which some of us really kind of already had a hunch, was that the county's scope of influence was really limited to only 2 areas of control. Most TID decisions are controlled by the municipality that holds the TID and the Joint Review Board that's comprised of 1 seat for each taxing entity and then a citizen member. And so most of that control rests there. And the structure of TID management or the law really falls to the state and not to individual counties. So their scope of influence was really limited to policy setting and guidance for the conduct of their Joint Review Board member, which is their finance director, so they can give her guidance and they can ask things of her as far as her participation in those Joint Review Board meetings. And the other thing they really can do is legislative advocacy. And so that really boiled down to those 2 things. So in terms of policy setting for their Joint Review Board member, the things that they're asking of her, and we brought her in and met with her and asked really like what she considers when she makes her decisions and how she performs those tasks. And so I knew how some of her answers were going to go because I chair the Joint Review Board for the city. And so I've watched her perform in ours. She goes to all different communities and she performs the same function. The good part of bringing her in was to let the task force see that she does not just act as a rubber stamp for projects. She really does ask pointed and tough questions. And, she needs to be satisfied that the standards are being met before she will take action, to approve anything that the Joint Review Board is asked to approve. So the consensus among the task force is that she's doing that job correctly, but then recognizing that the person in that position can change because, if someone moves on and you have new employees and whatnot, they wanted some shell of guidance for that person. So what they're going to ask of that person is that they do a thorough review of TID requests and reports, that they consistently apply the but-for tests and the 10 questions from the DOR TID manual that qualifies projects as TID eligible or not. They're asking that he or she request additional info on TIDs and TID changes as needed. They're asking that he or she understand the impact of TID action on the financial health of the county, and that they represent the interests of the county and its agencies in all of their decision-making. They're asking that that person review the performance and the underperformance of all TIDs in the county from all communities that are using it, and that person work to demand accountability for slow or lacking returns and growth within TID districts, and that they report back to county committees annually on TID health overall and the goals for active TIDs. So all of that information in the reports that are given once a year is available to the Joint Review Board. And so I think taking that information and boiling it down into a report that their committees can see from the outside of the process is helpful. So that's where they left off with their guidance to their person. In terms of legislative advocacy, they are recommending that the county board pass a resolution and forward it to state leaders to make the following TIF and TID law changes. One is to limit the maximum lifespan of new TIDs to a shorter timeline, a shorter number of years in total, so that that return on investment comes back to those taxing jurisdictions much sooner. They're asking that the ability for individual communities to seek legislative exemption from the 12% cap limit be removed or restricted. If that possibility is not removed, they're asking then that prior joint review board approval be sought and approved, or sought and given before that ask is made. They're asking that a maximum limitation on the number of lifespan extensions be imposed, and their suggestion is that a TID, if these changes apply, that a TID can only have one lifespan extension ever. And that lifespan extension should be with the support of the Joint Review Board. So right now, a municipality, we just did, you can extend for a year, use it for low-income housing, whatever. They would like to have the Joint Review Board involved in that process also, and recognize that one extension is it. And so even with a TID that needs to be expanded or extended for enhanced growth, one, and that would be the limit. They're asking that the state consider adjusting the membership of the Joint Review Board, because that makeup is dictated by state law. They're asking that the state would consider adding an extra citizen member, and that citizen member perhaps be a county resident not from the community in question. Because, if you have a citizen member, typically the citizen member is a city resident. And so that came out of some discussion that we had with the Joint Review Board member from the county saying, I am one person, and this table contains the school district, NTC, the county, the city, and the citizen member is usually also a city resident. So that person on the county end can, argue and oppose all they want, but in theory, if the citizen member is a city resident and typically supportive, and there's a city vote there, and they really then only need one other taxing jurisdiction to go along, and that Joint Review Board member feels outnumbered. So increasing the number of seats would then increase the number of yes votes that would be necessary to get a majority to make that happen. They were asking that these things be viewed from an urban and rural mindset, and so I think that's why they were looking for a county board member. Also asking that the state would consider requiring a school board or county board member at large be appointed. Because right now the taxing jurisdictions are typically represented by only their finance directors or finance people, but electeds are not at that table as far as members of the committee. So they're asking for some of those changes. They're also asking for a longer time frame for Joint Review Board review prior to decision making. So they would like those packets to be sent to the Joint Review Board no less than 10 days prior to that meeting where a decision would be asked for, so that that Joint Review Board member then has time to engage their peers, their departments, get feedback on the impact. One of the concerns they have with TIDs out in the county that are not so much a city issue is with some smaller communities, the county is providing way more services. And so in our case, we're doing our own police, our own fire, our own plowing, our own road maintenance, all of that. As development occurs in smaller communities, though, that are dependent on county services, that type of rapid growth and expansion or incentivization could present some type of an additional service need from within other county agencies. And they want some time to analyze those impacts as well, because that also could put upward pressure on their budgets, knowing that they would be waiting years and years for that shared return. So all of this, really, even if they pass that resolution at the board level, it's going to our state representatives. It really depends on those legislative representatives first being willing to take it up, then being willing to take it down to Madison, get some sponsorship for it, and actually get it passed through state legislative action. They recognize that there would likely be opposition from cities and villages, including the league, because TID is a valuable tool for development and growth, and they think that there's been some changes in the past to clarify things with TID, but it's not a easy undertaking to cause widespread change in how TIDs are regulated. So within the sphere of influence that they have, those are the changes they're recommending. Whether or not those pass is widely open to interpretation, but there was a lot of educational material. I think we spent a lot of time delving into the function of TIDs, how they work. We did a lot of myth versus fact type education, about the fact that at what point in time taxes are frozen within a TID, and how long they remain stable until the growth gets shared, the impact of extensions. We talked about a lot of those things, and I think everyone walked away from it with a different, like a heightened level of knowledge, but I think they also recognize that it is a very complex and difficult subject to go back and explain to constituents, because it is way beyond in terms of depth and complexity. It's more than like a 2-minute speech. You know, you just can't quite get all of it out. So at least taking time to study it. Dave Oberbeck was the chairman of the task force. He gave a report to the county board in January where he offered a lot of information that they didn't have before that was gleaned from the task force. And now the policy recommendations, I believe, will be going to their executive committee this month. So it was definitely a worthwhile effort. You know, whether or not it brings change, I don't know. Some of that change, if it passes, would obviously impact us here. But the entire process was really positive, and I think everyone came to it with an open mind, which was very helpful. So it was time well spent. So that's all I have, if anyone has questions.
I guess you said, how long had you been working on this?
About 6 months.
Okay. Because I just caught April 2024, so I was like, okay.
It was, it seemed like a long time, that we had a lot of time, but then when you go to try to schedule meetings and, you know, like complete the work and stuff in between, it felt like we were running out of time quickly. Like we got to January and we're like, oh my gosh, we're only half done. And so then we upped the frequency of the meetings. We started out with once a month or once every other week, and we were at about once every other week and a couple weeks in a row, just to like get to the finish line so that our recommendations were ready in time before the current sitting board was done, because they wanted those results. So Dave's able to give that report to them. It's a written report. He doesn't have to present to a meeting, so they'll all get their data that they asked for. But you know, the new incantation of the county board, if a resolution gets passed, will be on them.
Okay. And then you mentioned that other municipalities in the county use TID. Did they mention which other ones besides Wausau? Do you know
There's
how many
there's lots that have it.
in Marathon County? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep, and so their finance director attends joint review board meetings in all of those different communities and receives reports from all of them. So I mean, they're in Stratford, they're in, they're Stratford, they're in Marathon, they're in, I'm trying to think where else. Corona-Wetter have one? Yeah, there's quite a few in smaller communities. As far as, the other thing that they were wanting their representative to look at is community growth inside and outside TIDs, to make sure that there's a proportionate blend, that all of the growth isn't only occurring in TIDs, and that there's a diverse mix of growth inside and outside, because they're looking for that continued revenue stream that isn't delayed. So the stuff outside the TID is actually as important or more important to them for real-time revenue. So it was educational, and I think everybody walked away with a better feeling about how things work. You know, and they made some logical recommendations. Whether or not they have, any forward momentum, I guess we'll see.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Alder Killian.
Thank you, and this isn't a rhetorical one, but could we get the information on the last time the joint review board in this area did not approve something before it, or one example in the history of the joint review board? Did they talk about that?
In our case, our minutes are all published. So all of our joint review board data is available on the website. All of our TID health reports, and when the joint review board meets, it has official minutes as well. So, it meets annually for condition reports on all the TIDs, but then whenever there's an extension or a boundary adjustment, larger or smaller, the joint review board gets convened, as well as to analyze new TIDs, the formation of new TIDs. So, it only meets when there's a need other than the annual reports, but those minutes are available.
Thank you, and I wasn't referring to the minutes, but in the 6 months you and the others spent, or prior to that, this has been going on for decades, could I just get one factual, historical example of when the Joint Review Board has not approved something before it?
In recent years, I think our joint review board has supported the changes that were asked for. The finance director from the county was talking about her experience when we brought her in other communities. And so when other communities have asked for either TID extensions, expansions, or new TIDs, and the plan was way too speculative and it had way too long of a timeline for the return, she has actually voted no on a number of those. So depending on how the flow of information is and how complete the analysis is, the pro forma analysis is for the performance, if it's realistic and if it's feasible, she typically votes yes. But there were some that were subpar, she felt, and she did vote no on those in her role. But in total, our joint review board here has largely been positive.
So just to be clear, no one can provide an example of when the Joint Review Board in this area has not approved something before. And I'm guessing the reason it can't do that, to my knowledge, it's always approved everything that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of, and and perhaps it was before my time, both on the council and on this earth. But from the reading I've done, I don't recall an example that's happened. So I think what they're asking of the county to the representative to do X, Y, and Z in their role, yes, that's due diligence, but I would have hoped that's been kind of happening with all members of the Joint Review Board to date, because we're literally, I think, talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that's gone through that board in the past few decades. So, maybe this could be a positive step forward, but to date, the reason the Joint Review Board, they would not have approved everything but for the rubber stamp that they've been using. So I hope that changes. I do think some of the legislative advocacy sounds very positive regarding the 12% and the maximum number of extensions and so forth. And well, this is only tangentially relevant. Alder Rasmussen brought up with some of the other cities in the county, kind of the additional services that can sometimes be necessary when these developments occur. This is not a service per se, but with infrastructure, I think we've seen and other areas have seen that if you have a very large development, sometimes it's necessary to feed it with new infrastructure, utilities, roads, etc. And I think in Wisconsin allows a development impact fee that's legal in Wisconsin, and that might be something not just for Wausau, but those other towns. Essentially, if we have a massive development and the main reason we're feeding it with utilities and infrastructure is to serve that development, perhaps we can check on kind of the statutory opportunities of a development impact fee, because I think it would put more of the onus on those in the private sector behind the development, and maybe take a little of the pressure off of the taxpayer. So maybe that's something that could be synergistic with some. But yeah, the ones that the changes, legislative changes, and the increased due diligence, those sound positive. Thank you.
In my experience with our joint review board, they really do ask good questions, and they ask tough questions. I mean, they don't just walk in and nod and leave and it's a short meeting. I think they really do ask pointed and detailed questions, and they all look at it through a different lens. That was one thing we talked about, where one stakeholder is looking for maybe an increased number of pupils. One is looking to create workforce development programs. One's looking for workforce. Some are looking for residential development as a result of these things. And they ask questions from their own point of view, but they do ask really good questions. And one of the examples we talked about was a tax increment district that's operating in Stratford that seemed troubled at the beginning, and then a large project came along that completely changed the scope of that district, and it's now functioning really well. And it's a positive example of how a small community can use TID to really build itself up. So we did have some great positive examples. We've had some examples that were also negative. One of the sitting members on the task force was Jacob Langenhan, and he said there was one in a neighboring municipality where he believed that TID through extensions has existed through his entire lifespan, and which is way too long. And so, why that happens versus closing a TID, returning the revenue, and creating something new, no one could understand. And so we kind of talked our way through a lot of things that, from a county standpoint, they have a broader picture because they see it in all these communities. We see it just here. And so often we're the example because we're one of the larger utilizers, but we do have a large volume of positive results. That was one of the examples that was given. Also, the flow of information that's given to our joint review board versus some of the others is way more complete on the front end. They don't have to ask for, push and pull to get enough information to make a good decision. So there was some positive things to be said about our development. I mean, obviously, there's concerns about some projects as well. There is some concern about overusing TID to fund infrastructure when there isn't a project afoot. So, if you're just going to use it to rebuild a street just because you need to fix a street and it happens to be in a certain spot on the map, that doesn't necessarily pay dividends for the county. So, they have some concerns about that type of overutilization. But where it breeds tax base and job growth, they're willing to wait for revenue for those things, but there's certain other caveats that are legal to use TID for that they're not real excited about. So, it helped me to sit with them as well to learn what their concerns are, because, even when we had some discussion in our finance committee about the extension of TID 6, I was then able to bring back those thoughts and say, hey, if we're going to extend this, we need some defined purpose, and the other taxing jurisdictions, just so you know, are not real excited about this, and we were able to fine tune leaving that open, and then maybe consider closing them. One thing, rather than early closure even, is when a TID is really, really performing well, is to consider shrinking the boundary and even making a partial return much earlier to the other taxing jurisdiction, make the map smaller. If it can sustain itself with a smaller map footprint, you could return some of that revenue much sooner outside the boundaries if you make a boundary adjustment to shrink that TID, and they all are fans of that. So going forward, if we have that ability and successful TIDs, I think it would bode well for our neighbors and partners at the table if we would consider stuff like that as well.
Great.
So,
Any follow-up? Are the minutes or anything from that task force, are they
I
on
believe
the
they're all on the county website.
Okay. Was it
Todd-
recorded?
Yeah, yes, and
Okay.
it was actually also available virtual, because some of the
Okay.
members had to attend virtual. County board chairman attended virtually.
Okay.
And so Administrator Leonard and Tasha Ronaldo both staffed those meetings, and so they took minutes of
Okay.
all of it.
So residents could watch them on their YouTube channel?
I don't know if they were all on live stream in real time.
Okay.
They ended up meeting at the library. We started out meeting at the county courthouse, and then because it was meeting after 4:30, they would have had to have held their security checkpoint open on overtime for us if we were still in session. So they asked us to find a meeting room that was outside the courthouse building that didn't need that level of checkpoint. So we ended up in the conference room at the library most of the time.
Okay.
And once over at River Drive, and so they didn't have AV capability, but there are decent minutes.
Okay, cool. So a resident could go and read through
They
what
can.
was discussed?
Yep.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments about this item? All right, let's move on to number 3, discussion and possible action on the third amendment to Brick's Riverfront lease. So we have it in the packet. We briefly discussed it last meeting. So Randy, do you have any additions or?
No, nothing in particular. Nothing in particular on this. Just one of the questions that I got between our meetings was the previous agreement ran out in September, and question of why we're just handling this now, and what that came down to was the city and Bricks have both had a number of issues with this building since it was constructed, specifically with the HVAC system. And the city worked on it over that time, and we feel like that we're at a point where we're comfortable with it and that we can move forward. And Bricks wanted to ensure that those improvements were made. Obviously, we can't test the HVAC system in the wintertime, but with what's been done, both parties are feeling positive about it.
Okay. Any questions for Randy? Yeah, Alder Killing?
Thank you. Could you confirm the length, the term of this lease?
I think May 29th to September 4th?
Yes, it'll end on September 25th, 2024.
Okay, great.
It's being, so although we're signing it in April, it'll be retroactive back to that September date.
Okay, thank you. And, when I had talked with Ms. Brodick after the last meeting about this, one of the points of concern that I had was for the riverfront location. It's, I guess to say the least, I think a very generous, appealing, rent, if you will. But she did remind me of the HVAC or HVAC issues and kind of getting things resolved. So, I think tonight I'd feel comfortable approving this, but maybe after everything is in order and there's a short term where things are smooth and there haven't been issues, revisiting that cost, because perhaps for kind of an introductory rate, that makes sense, but in the long term, I'd be quite concerned about that low cost. Thank you.
So is that a motion?
It was not.
Oh, okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Alder Hanky.
So I see it started in 2019, and there's language in there that it's supposed to go up 3% every 3 years, or?
On page 4.
Anyway, I did the math, and it looks like the next rent increase would be next year. Just from what I was reading. Oh, right there, yeah. Okay. So that might be another good time to revisit that. Otherwise, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay,
I'll second.
all right. Any other questions? Good, all right. All those in favor of approving this, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, the amendment is approved. Number 4 is discussion and possible action on the sale of 6 acres of city-owned property of the northwest corner of 315 North 72nd Street to Green Tree Construction for residential development. So it looks like we had quite a good memo from you in the packet, as well as the map of the parcels. But anything to add that was, or to make more specific or highlight?
Yeah, nothing in particular. I think just based on what's been happening with this, the council approved the preliminary plat for large development in this area, which really cuts off the potential for this smaller, I call it a peninsula, just the way it forms through that wetland and where it comes from. Instead of having 4 single-family homes that would have direct access off 72nd, we feel that it's a lot more efficient use of this property to have a cul-de-sac built in it. It works nice for just the way that the property lays out, that a cul-de-sac can be built there. A lot more use of that land. Obviously, we all know that we need housing within the city, and I think this is a good opportunity. In my time with the city, I haven't had any interest on this small piece. So I think it's a good opportunity. We aren't going to do large manufacturing next to a residential area like this. So a good opportunity. It's already zoned SR2. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Alder Rasmussen.
So I have just one. I think that the sale price of the land, maybe it's not a question, but a comment. In reviewing it, it does seem like the sale price of the land is within our standard. It seems like a fair price. And I was excited to see that we'll then have some continual tax base created there once those homes are up. So this seemed like an easy one to support. So I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay. Is there a second? And then we can have more discussion or questions. Alder Lukens says second. Any other questions or comments? Alder Killian.
Just a couple of quick ones, and Alder Rasmussen kind of touched on the price. You've got that in your memo about 12,500, so that's consistent with typically what the acreage is going for.
Correct. That's what we've historically used within the business campus for developable land.
Great. And then the last one, even though this isn't wetland, it's adjacent to it, we don't anticipate any challenges or issues, environmental or regulatory. We're pretty good to go on this.
Yeah, we'll have them, require them to do their due diligence before, they're going to want to do that before that we close on this, if it's approved by the city. So they'll need to come in and do it. They've done a lot of wetland delineation in that area already, so we'll put that on them to come forward and go through that process.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right. So I guess all those in favor of this sale, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. That motion approves, or is approved. I guess we're on to number 5, adjournment. So do I have a motion to adjourn? Alder Killian. Second?
Second.
Alder Hanky. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Who seconded the adjournment?
Hanky.
Okay, thank you.